Demon Slayer Season 3. Beautiful, gorgeous, the perfect tearjerker of a finale. But what if our demonic best girl Nezuko Kamado took an all-expenses-paid trip to fiery, burning unalivement and couldn't in fact conquer the sun? Does Tanjiro's will to fight stem from duty to his blood or to his blade? What happens next? Does he lose his will or does he keep it? Let's take a look at Path 1 first. Path 1. The Broken Slayer. With Nezuko dead, Tanjiro will become one of the few, if not the only shonen protagonist to have his dream crushed before he could reach it. He wanted to save his sister. He didn't, he lost, game over. With Nezuko gone, all of the pain and heartbreak Tanjiro kept just at bay begins to seep through. His perfect, calm soul becomes a tidal wave of grief and he breaks down. His sword slips from his hands, never to be picked up again. This would essentially mark the end of Tanjiro's demon-slaying career. Without the will to fight as relentlessly during the Hashira training arc, it's doubtful that Tanjiro even makes it through the program. A program which, by the way, would severely drop in quality. Because without Nezuko's blood being the new cure for sunlight, Muzan won't recall his demons to strategize. This means that Hashira still have to be diligent in their protection over their respective regions and won't have the extra time to put into training these new slayers without being stretched very thin. Sure, a begrudging sense of duty that at this point he would slowly start to resent may sluggishly drag him forward. But it won't be enough to reach for heights like the see-through world, the selfless state, or even the Demon Slayer mark he just awakened. Slowly, our boy would wane, losing sleep, weight, and energy until eventually he just leaves the story altogether as a recluse or dies in the process of training. We're nearing the end of the manga, and there's not much time left before all hell breaks loose in the final arc. So unless Tanjiro has a life-changing epiphany within the next few weeks, the fate of our other characters is sealed. Up next in the story is Ubayashiki's death and the Infinity Castle arc that immediately follows. Since Muzan wouldn't be in endgame mode here, it's unclear as to whether or not he would visit his distant relative in his humble abode. If that's the case, who knows how the story would turn out? If you read the manga, you know that Muzan showing his face was an immense drop in his guard, that the Hashira immediately capitalized on by straight up jumping the poor dude with the entire might of the Demon Slayer core. Without this movement of vulnerability, things would very likely just settle back into the status quo, with the Hashira now overworked and exhausted, continuing to search unsuccessfully for Muzan before gradually getting picked off one by assorted upper moons. Without all of the Hashira jumping Muzan at once, there would be no reason to open up the Infinity Castle, and therefore the Infinity Castle would never be found, which would be a pretty anticlimactic fizzle down from the growing tension in the past few arcs. But what else can you do if a trail runs cold? Now the more bombastic option is if Muzan does end up showing anyways. Then the story progresses as normal. The Infinity Castle arc begins, save for one glaring Tanjiro-sized hole in the opposing party. One person wouldn't normally make a big difference, but when that one person is your protagonist, well, things get a little wonky. First of all, with Tanjiro gone, Giyu would face Akaza alone, and with Tanjiro gone, Giyu would lose. This not only removes one of the few Hashiras to actually survive the show, but it also leaves Akaza alive as a very pesky variable to deal with. Everything else would go as planned, culminating in the destruction of the Infinity Castle, but with a very powerful Akaza roaming through it beforehand. This would likely mean the death of a few more Hashira too, before Akaza either goes down or they all die, too weak from their fights with the other upper moons. In other news, this would be a field day for Akaza, who not only gets to fight many powerful fighters at once, but also gets to keep his head. He might eventually fall to Gyome, however, who may use his last legs to take out the Upper Moon 3. But that leaves a distinct lack of firepower in the final few standing to take down Muzan, which, given the casualties, just wouldn't happen. All the Hashiras either perish or become forcefully turned into Upper Moon demons to fill up the ranks of Muzan's new regime, the New Demon Age, where nothing stands in the way of blood and carnage, except sunlight of course, because Muzan still hasn't found a cure yet. Oh well, you win some, you lose some. And in this scenario, the Demon Slayer Corps certainly aren't winning. But what would happen in an alternate timeline? Path 2, the Clouded Slayer. Tanjiro is, at his core, a character that is pure of heart. In fact, He may be the most blindingly purest-hearted character out there running through the Demon Slayer world. No matter what desperation, determination, pain, or exhaustion he feels when fighting his enemies, he always finds it in himself to forgive them as they pass, making sure they fade peacefully. It's enough to make a grown demon cry. This is why it was a different kind of unnerving to see Tanjiro exhibit genuine, primal, bloodlusted rage when fighting Hantengu following Nezuko's death. There was no peace there, no reconciliation. Just a rapid hacking away at his oversized creep until it died, leaving a gaping hole in his heart and soul. Nezuko's death would break something in Tanjiro, shaking his core. This would be the moment where Tanjiro's pristine soul begins to cloud, shrouded in a mist of grief. And this trial, this unclouding, would in fact be the greatest test of Tanjiro's purity. Because in this trial, the one he needs to be able to find forgiveness for is himself. And it'll be a journey to get there, but one he'd definitely take. In the event that Tanjiro keeps his will to fight, I think the trauma of watching his last family member die would result in something of a Muichiro situation, considering that is verbatim what happened to him too. Tanjiro would, as a coping mechanism, develop a form of amnesia, instead clouding himself with an alternate personality, much like the clouds that cover his soul, to shield him from this moment. This new Tanjiro is more serious, less talkative, has a strong head, and an unwavering duty to protect the weak, ensuring they never perish under a demon's hands, though he just doesn't know why. Just like the Mist Hashira, his duty still isn't driven by hatred though. It's driven by an intense sense of regret and longing to make sure no loved one ever dies again. He's still a devastatingly strong demon slayer of the sun-breathing variety, but something in his eyes is missing. The journey to finding his soul begins, but we'll have to pause the main story for a bit as Tanjiro disappears for a bit of a bender. He'll decide to take matters into his own hands. He can't wait for others to take care of the problem for him. A calm but brutal, almost mindless demon-slaying rampage ensues as Tanjiro uses his expert senses to track down demons and decimate them all on his own, moving in a dream state, almost purely on instinct. This is Tanjiro's vigilante arc. Eventually, Giyu, Zenitsu, and Inosuke would be tasked with tracking our hero down, where they find him malnourished, sleep-deprived, and exhausted, but recklessly continuing his crusade. If an Upper Moon shows up now, that's game over, and honestly, one might. We know how much Akaza hates Tanjiro, so to see his rivals swaying through the forest looking for blood is exactly the kind of excuse he's looking for to off the Scarface little bastard. In which case, if Akaza finds and fights Tanjiro in this state, he'd lose, badly. Then the story continues like it did in Path 1. But let's assume Giyu and Inosuke come find Tanjiro first and manage to calm him down and bring him back just in time for Hashira training. The Hashira training arc continues as normal, with Zenitsu and Inosuke confused, shocked, and saddened by the complete shift in their friendship. They, as well as all the Hashira, would attempt to coax Tanjiro out of his state, with Giyu and Muichiro likely trying the hardest, the former because they're somewhat of a guardian figure for Tanjiro, and the latter because at one point in time, he and Tanjiro's situations were reversed, and Tanjiro had helped him out then. This would result in Tanjiro and Muichiro becoming a lot closer over the course of the training arc, bonded by trauma. The training program finishes with Tanjiro coming out fine, but still not himself. The words of his friends have registered, but they haven't made a change yet. With the Infinity Castle arc beginning, Tanjiro faces another issue. With his sense of self in question, he likely won't be able to access the selfless state against Akaza. This likely means that Akaza won't acknowledge his strength and will not concede an honorable defeat. Unfortunately, this drags the battle on much longer and would likely lead to severe injuries for Tanjiro and the death of Giyu Tomioka. Akaza still goes down, but much harder. Then the rest of the arc continues as normal right until the final moment when Tanjiro becomes the Demon King under Muzan's cells. In this moment of near-death and existential toil, I think that's when the dam breaks. Tanjiro's growth, his friends' words, and the effects of intense physical trauma would all culminate in his memories returning and his soul clouds coming to peace and forgiving himself for his sister's death. Because, all of a sudden, he has all of demonkind in his hands. He has the ability to ensure that no one, man, woman, or child, will ever have to be turned into a demon again. No more death, no more loss. This restoration of self at his darkest point in the story is what I feel would give him the strength to overcome Muzan's will and instead remove demons from the world permanently. Tanjiro destroys himself, sparing all the remaining Hashira around him who would live to tell his tale. Taking the demon race with him, Tanjiro dies with tears in his eyes and a smile on his face. He'll see his sister soon and thank her for her sacrifice with his own. But what do you think? Would Tanjiro give up? Do you think Nezuko's death spells the end of the story? Check out this video next!